we have for you relates to Miles Taylor. You may recall that Miles Taylor served in the Department of Homeland Security during your previous administration. In his capacity with the Department of Homeland Security, he leaked classified information. He wrote a book under the pseudonym Anonymous, making outrageous claims both about your administration and about others in it. What this presidential memorandum is going to do, one, it's going to strip any active clearance that he has in light of his past activities involving classified information. It's also going to order the Department of Justice to investigate his activities to see what else might come up in that context, given his egregious behavior during your previous administration.
And I had no idea who this guy was. I had no idea. These of lies, bad things. And I think it's like a traitor. It's like spying. He walks into the office. He's supposed to be sitting here. A lot of people, I'll be here and there'll be 20 people standing in the room. There'll be oftentimes young people in the office. I assume he was one of them at least. But I didn't know anything about him. And he wrote a book, Anonymous, and I always thought it was terrible. And now we have a chance to find out whether or not it was terrible. But it was a work of fiction. Had a lot of publicity, got himself a nice job with CNN or one of them. And I think we have to do something about it. You can't have that happen. If that happens to other presidents, it wouldn't be sustainable. And if it was a Democrat president, I'd say that's a terrible thing. A thing like that can happen. That's a terrible thing. And it's time to find out whether or not somebody can do that. Can they write a book? But we're going to find out whether or not somebody's allowed to do that. I think it's a very important case, and I think he's guilty of treason, if you want to know the truth. But we'll find out. And I assume we're recommending this to the Department of Justice.
Yes, sir.
And that, my friends, is how you turn the White House and the Oval Office into an authoritarian state regime. Hi, my name is Suri Crowe, and you're watching the MeidasTouch Network. So now we have the President of the United States ordering legal hits on people he just doesn't like for doing what? Using their First Amendment rights. Miles Taylor is a Trump 1.0 Homeland Security staffer who initially wrote a piece he bylined Anonymous in the first Trump term. He wrote about how reckless the Trump White House was at the time. Taylor later came out as a vocal critic of Trump, writing a book and even endorsing President Biden in the 2020 election.
I served as the chief of staff of the Department of Homeland Security under the Donald Trump administration. I would go into the office, I would read my intelligence brief, and then it was my job to help the Department of Homeland Security to keep our country safe. What we saw week in and week out, and for me after 2.5 years in that administration, was terrifying. We would go in to try to talk to him about a pressing national security issue, cyber attack, terrorism threat. He wasn't interested in those things. To him, they weren't priorities. The president wanted to exploit the Department of Homeland Security for his own political purposes and to fuel his own agenda. At the border, he wanted to restart zero tolerance and separate families. He said he wanted to go further and have a deliberate policy of ripping children away from their parents to show those parents that they shouldn't come to the border in the first place. A lot of the time, the things he wanted to do not only were impossible, but in many cases illegal. He didn't want us to tell him it was illegal anymore because he knew that there were, and these were his words, he knew that he had magical authorities. I came away completely convinced based on firsthand experience that the president was ill-equipped and wouldn't become equipped to do his job effectively. And what's worse, was actively doing damage to our security. People who are still serving in this administration have said to me, just wait until the second term. It'll be no holds barred. It'll be shock and awe. We'll do what we want. Given what I've experienced in the administration, I have to support Joe Biden for president. And even though I'm not a Democrat, even though I disagree on key issues, I'm confident that Joe Biden will protect the country.
Now Trump has not only ordered Taylor to be criminally investigated by his weaponized DOJ for writing the book, he also took aim at a former DHS attorney named Chris Krebs, whose cardinal sin was merely stating that the 2020 election was not stolen and in fact was the most secure election in history, in conjunction with Smartmatic and Dominion voting data, the two groups that filed successful lawsuits against Fox News for defaming them about the 2020 election results. Remember, Dominion won a $787 million settlement from Fox. And guess what? Trump is now going after the law firm that repped Dominion in that suit, Sussman Godfrey.
I mean, Chris Krebs, all he did was rebuke the president's false claim that the election wasn't stolen as somebody in his administration. And here's what Trump is trying to do. Look, I don't know how much of it. You never know with Donald Trump. Is he trying to distract you like a guy with a laser pointer and the media is a bunch of cats? Is he trying to get people to chase things so they stop talking about the fact that he caved and did a total about face on the tariffs after telling us for days that he wasn't going to do a pause, and now he's suddenly pausing because the world economy is collapsing? Is he doing this as a distraction? I don't know, but on its face, it is incredibly pernicious for him to sign executive orders and launch investigations into people simply for speaking out against what they saw from his administration. And also what he was saying there is though it's like highly unusual. Look, lots of books get written by people who are insiders in administrations who talk about the things that happened in the rooms. That's actually very common. That's what reporters do. And what he's trying to do here, though, is to make people afraid of speaking out against him. Not just people from before, but people who are there now.
Listen to the brilliant Mark Elias of Democracy Docket explain what is really going on here.
You basically saw Donald Trump target two individuals who you just discussed with Mary for criminal investigation. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, it was just straightforward. Like, I'm signing this document instructing the Department of Justice to investigate these two individuals. And if you listen to what he said, it was essentially like, for whatever. You know, like there's not even a pretense of predication against them. Well, they then moved to law firms and targeted Sussman Godfrey, a law firm who, it's interesting, he described it, as you said, for being involved in the 2020 election. What Sussman Godfrey did was represent a private party in a private piece of litigation involving defamation against Fox News, in which Fox News settled the case. And that is what Donald Trump now believes renders an entire law firm unreliable and worthy of punishment by the full force of the Department of Justice. He then went on to detail how there are several more law firms who are set to capitulate, have already capitulated, some paying as much apparently as $125 million in legal services. And he ended with saying that perhaps he was going to put these law firms all to work on working for the administration on trade, because he now has, he thinks, $1 billion owed to him by these law firms. So, Nicole, I run through this because if you take these individually, what you are left with is thinking, oh, that's terrible and that's terrible. When you watch it as a whole, what you realize is that Donald Trump is trying to bring the legal establishment to its knees. He is weaponizing the Department of Justice against his political enemies. And he is about to turn these capitulating law firms into his foot soldiers. So all of these cowards and all these big law firms that think, oh, didn't we pull one over on Donald Trump? We agreed to do pro bono and it won't really change anything. Guess what? Based on what he said yesterday, you're going to be representing the coal companies. Based on what he said today, you're going to be helping him implement crippling tariffs against the American people. So that's what the cowards are doing. And I hope to see Sussman Godfrey stand tall.
He's exactly right. If the regime can knock out all of the First Amendment and immigration lawyers and force the big law firms, the white shoe firms that often do this kind of work for free, pro bono, into now representing Trump's interests, well, then where will we, the peasants, go for legal representation? Which is why it is imperative that lawyers and firms do stand up for the rule of law and don't fold the way Skadden Arps, Paul Weiss, Milbank, and Wilkie Farr and others have apparently done, because it will never be enough for Trump, his team of Stephen Millers, Elon Musk's, and their insatiable appetite for power, revenge, and harm. Here's another chilling example of this regime targeting First Amendment rights.
They're going to keep pushing and pushing until something stops them. And then yesterday we saw an absolutely chilling story out of Michigan, where immigration agents detained and demanded to search the phone of an American citizen at the Detroit airport after he returned from a vacation with his wife and two daughters. His name is Amir Makhlid, And he broke no laws. He's a lawyer himself, and his only infraction, at least as far as we can tell in the eyes of the Trump administration, appears to be that he represents a pro-Palestinian demonstrator who was arrested at the University of Michigan last year. And that attorney, Amir Maklid, joins me now. Mr. Maklid, it's great to have you in the program. Just take me through, I think you were on a vacation in the Dominican Republic. You land in Detroit. You got to go through customs. What happens next?
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. Well, what happens next is when I get to the immigration checkpoint and I speak to a passport officer, they ran my passport, which happens routinely whenever you're coming in through the border. But the strange part is the agent looked up and looked to another government officer and asked if the TTRT team was available. And I didn't recognize that acronym, so I did a quick Google search while I was just standing at the desk there. And it turns out that term meant the Tactical Terrorism Response Team, which, you know, dropped my heart into my stomach. I almost nearly hit the floor thinking about what the heck that could be about. And so I looked over at my wife and I said, honey, they're going to take me in for questioning. I'm pretty confident that they're going to ask me to step into an interview room. I was sitting in an interview room. A plain-clothed agent who wouldn't identify himself to me asked me if, you know, I was carrying my cell phone. And I said yes. And he says, well, first off, let me just say this. We know who you are. We know that you're an attorney. And we know that you represent some high-profile clients. And the only high-profile case that I'm involved in right now is the representation of a young lady named Samantha Lewis. And she's involved at the University of Michigan and was engaged in political speech and protesting against the war in Gaza. And in our defense, we're going after the criminalization of free speech in the University of Michigan case. And so we've made a lot of public remarks about that topic, and we've stood tall with our clients on that issue. So as this conversation with this agent was going, he said, listen, he hands me a pamphlet which had a federal statute on it and said, listen, we're allowed to take your phone, even if you're an American citizen, and we can hold it for several days or weeks even, and then give it back to you once we're done going through it. Or you can comply with us right now, give us the password, and let us go through it. And I said to them, well, guys, you already know, there's two agents in the room. You already know that I'm an attorney, and you know that a substantial amount of my work is going to be on my phone. And in these days, everything's electronic anyways. Right. I said, I'm not giving you the access when I have privileged communications on my cell phone. Well, that charge, put him in a position where he had to go speak to a supervisor. He comes back several minutes later and says, why don't you write down, he gave me a legal pad, why don't you write down what it is that you feel is privileged, and we won't go through that stuff. We'll go through everything else. I said, what kind of a futile exercise would that be? I've got to go through, nearly 15 years of communications and emails and files to say this is privileged and this isn't? I said, that's ridiculous. It's an impossibility to go through all that stuff. So we came after, this is going on for nearly an hour and a half. We came to the final pass. He said, listen, again, if you want to leave here with your phone, you're going to have to give us access. I agreed to let them see my contacts only. So it wasn't random. This is not something where I was just randomly selected. Right. They knew who I was. They knew my history. They knew I had represented high-profile cases. They told me we looked you up and they were ready to ask me pointed questions about certain things. And because he brought up the high-profile case, it led me to believe that they're targeting me specifically because I've taken up the defense for this young lady, Miss Samantha Lewis. And to me, I was really appalled by that apparent overreach of the government at this point. And they were Customs and Border Protection agents, just wearing plain clothes. He showed me a badge, but he wouldn't tell me his name.
You ever had an interaction like this before where you had, were questioned, but ever had anyone in law enforcement mention your clients as the possible motive?
I've never been interviewed at the border. Recent as December, on Christmas break, we took another family trip to Mexico. I came back and nobody stopped us. But that was not during the Trump administration. Right. This is the distinction in this situation. We now have a new administration who's made it very clear that they're going to attack attorneys who are taking on, cases that are against the interests of what this current administration believes in.
Plainclothes agents who won't identify themselves. This is becoming a very familiar story with this regime. Rumeysa Ozturk, anyone? And it sounds an awful lot like Hitler's brown shirt thugs. You guys, this is all about intimidation. And all of these companies and law firms and media empires and universities don't seem to realize that by bending the knee to Trump, like Rumpelstiltskin. He will always want more. That's what terrorists do. And you don't ever negotiate with terrorists. Ever. Remember, chapter 1 of Timothy Snyder's book, do not obey in advance. We are fighting off an authoritarian takeover of our country. And history will remember the heroes and the cowards as well. Listen, I get afraid. For the first time in my life, I have been afraid to be a citizen in the United States of America, afraid to use, like in the broader sense, my journalistic voice. It happened when I was working in corporate media because they would try to intimidate me. If you guys know the story of when I was working for Sinclair during Trump's first run for office. But clearly it's much worse now. I was afraid to even do the story at one point during the day today, but I forced my fear and said, no. As an American citizen, I have the right to use my First Amendment speech as a journalist to speak. And the minute that I become afraid to speak under my constitutional rights, and that you do too, well, that's the minute that they have won. And we cannot let that happen. That's how these thugs rule. That's what authoritarian regimes do. They rule by intimidation. If they can knock down all these other players, then they figure that they will fear you into compliance. And that's why my little handbook written by Timothy Snyder is so critically important. We cannot obey in advance. We know what our rights are as American citizens. And my God, that's why every lawyer and law firm who's standing up to this thug presidency, God bless them. Okay. Thanks for watching, you guys. I hope to see you back here soon. My socials are down below. Please follow me along. I've started a Substack as well. I will see you back here soon. Remember, fear is contagious, but so is courage. Peace.
Love this video? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch and help us blow past 1 million followers.